Hello, everyone. Welcome to a review on Chapter 6 from our Promo Tech book. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about regulatory ethics and advertising industry and the marketing industry in general. So we'll talk about society's kind of greater impact of this promotion advertising. We'll talk about some of the factors that go along with that, the ethical implications that come along with it. We'll talk about things like the FCC and the FTC and regulation that comes along with bad advertising sometimes, and kind of walk you through that a little bit. And we'll talk about self-regulation and how that kind of plays a market in what people and what companies, how they direct what they do, and how actually industries more than individual companies direct what they do. And we'll also just finish it up with some discussion about direct marketing and sales and how that implicates all this kind of ethical questions as well. So jumping into it, you know, this idea of advertising, I asked you a question as part of an extra mile challenge, about the ethics of advertising, or what are the ethics? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And the truth is, and as most people wrote, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of great advertising for great products that have done, incredible things for people. And there's also been a lot of manipulative advertising that's happened throughout the decades. We think of the things that are good as, having this great impact that delivers some sort of message or some sort of new product or some sort of innovation that helps drive, humankind and human culture. And, there's increases in productions that come along with that, but then we also often don't think of the negative side that comes from that. The consumeristic side that we are here, especially in the US, where we want more and we want it cheaper, and some of the impact that has on the countries that produce some of the goods for us. Namely, we talk about countries like China that we do a lot of importing from, and we want cheap goods, and are there labor practices that happen as a result of that? Are we promoting the things we want? Are we promoting what we would all consider good quality kind of lifestyle kind of things, or are we promoting something that has a negative impact? One of the kind of the criticisms of social media and social media marketing and advertising right now is the hidden aspect of it, and we actually don't talk about that much in this quarter and throughout the book. But most people probably are aware that people will say things under anonymity. So there's that whole side of it as well, that by opening up this kind of feedback loop that comes along with it, we can often have some more negatives that come along with it. So somewhere in the middle, I think some organizations do a good job, some organizations don't do a good job, and that's why we're here, to try and learn about this a little bit, to kind of formalize our opinions maybe a little bit more. So book lays out this little chart, and it's just kind of a way, this isn't a formal thing. You don't see this, out in the real world as, a grades sheet on what advertising does, but it's just something to kind of keep in your mind as you go through and looking at advertising, just a way to kind of classify things and try and compare one thing to the other. Informative versus trivial. Is it giving you information that you need that's applied to you, or is it just thrown out there trying to get you to, marketing for marketing's sake? There's no intrinsic value in what they're doing, right? The cost implications of it. I kind of mentioned that in the previous slide. Cuts cost, raises cost. Advertising this idea that if you sell more, quantitative scale, that it's going to drive down your costs. But there's also a impact on the producer for that as well. So just by sheer making something more popular doesn't always, have an impact that we think it's going to have. Is it meeting the needs that we kind of society collectively say it should be, or is it kind of creating some sort of ulterior needs that are out there? We can all think of examples of products that are marketing that are just pure extravagance, right? That think of, I don't know, your favorite luxury car commercial, right? When you look at those things, it's obviously usually not directed to people like you and me. It's usually directed to someone that's buying a $200,000 Jaguar. They have a different kind of sensibility and how they put that information out there. And is it meeting what it's trying to do, or does it kind of lead to the next factor, this kind of artful versus demeaning messaging? I definitely have seen some commercials, and with your Ages of Advertising project here too. Once you start looking back on things from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the 70s and 80s, This idea that sensibilities have changed and our culture has changed, and advertising has definitely changed along with it. So when you look at some of those older ads, or when you look at ads that are sometimes targeted to a different population, that they're not really doing what they should be doing, that it's not trying to be artful, not trying to be effective. It's trying to insert some sort of class system sometimes, or some sort of ranking system along with that. So also idea of how media involves in this is really kind of interesting. The book kind of goes into it a little bit, but it's this idea that, I mean, the truth is advertising has spurred and propped on mass media. So we talk about things like radio, we talk about things like catalogs and television. And the reason we watch our programs that we love, whatever they may be, is through advertising dollars that people pay to, put an ad during whatever show you're watching. We're less than a week away from the Super Bowl. What 30-second spot at the Super Bowl is a few $1 million, right? So that's what's funding the broadcasting of that game. It's not the actual game itself. It's the money that comes in through advertising helps put that game on the television that's in front of us. Just as a side subject, we'll be doing a little exercise here too after the Super Bowl, talking about Super Bowl ads, because this is an advertising class, and the Super Bowl is like the most important time for advertisers. It's where a lot of cool things come out. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here going forward too. So ethics, this all leads us to this idea of are people being ethical? We just looked at that chart, if you end up with too many things on the right side that are, that aren't trying to be functional, aren't trying to be, additive to our culture, we tend to think of those things as unethical. And there's been lots of unethical advertising over the years, whether it be how the advertise actually laid out or the claims that were made. This is, we start looking through more unregulated times. We get back to the 50s and 60s. Like, people were just saying what they wanted. There wasn't anyone coming in saying, no, you can't say that. And we'll talk about those governing bodies here in a little bit. But they said them because they were, that they were effective. Because, people want to make a living too. People want to sell things, and the more they sell things, that they found out they could do it through messaging. So tell you it's one thing, you would buy it, and you'd have no recourse afterwards. So this idea of trying to come up with ethical standards, how things were laid out has become became a really hot button issue in the world of marketing and the world of advertising, and it's led us to kind of where we are today. And we like to think that we're at a good place in advertising, that we are fairly fair and fairly truthful and fairly cooperative in how we present things. But then again, I'm willing to bet we jump forward 100 years and look back on this time as well, and we're gonna cringe at maybe some of the stuff we put out. And that just has to do with the evolution of the ethics. That nothing ever stays the same. Cultures change. And actually, as we'll talk about, I believe in next chapter, chapter 7, we start looking at cultural from country to country. That definitely has an impact. Things that might be okay to say here might not be okay to say in other countries, and vice versa. So we'll talk about that more in the next chapter as well. So I mentioned regulation. Regulation has come in. FTC is kind of the leader in that. And I'll say the FTC and the FCC, and I'll talk about those more here in the next slide, I believe. But this idea that they're the ones that kind of came in and said you can't have, you have to be truthful in what you're saying. You can't do unfair advertising. That it's going to cause a substantial. You're selling a product that may not be what we want to be sold out there in the public, or might be saying things about that product that just isn't true. So the government has come in, and there's been a bunch of laws been put into place that has managed that a lot. Also, like, just the idea that companies can't become too powerful in what they do. That the government has stepped in, and this is less on the advertising level and more on the overall company level. But they want to be able to regulate how much power an individual company has over the population. Think about Amazon right now, right? Amazon right now, there's this word monopoly on here. Amazon, like, what do they have their fingers in? They have it in a little bit of everything, in retail sales and, cloud computing. They have it in this and that and whatever it may be. It's hard to go through a day without touching a product that either came to you or has dealt with Amazon at some point. So, that's what they're also here for, is to help make sure that people just can't overpower you with their messaging. Talk about the big companies of the world, the Amazons, the Walmarts, actually, that they have the power to do the advertising, to get the promotion, to drive you to them. That's always been one of the knocks of Walmart, is Walmart would move into communities, and then they would, they have buying power, they have advertising power, and they would come in and put all the small businesses out of business. And then they own the region. So something to think about as we talking about, kind of this ethics and regulation part of advertising and marketing as well. So here's just the illustration from the book. Things like deceptive advertising practices, unfair ad allowances. Like it's kind of what I was talking about, that, it's kind of like this kickback notion, that, Walmart can say, hey, I want, 5% off as my advertising allowance from some manufacturer. And it's really not, it's not a cost that Walmart's actually going to use. It's just a way for them to take an additional discount. So when we're talking about ad allowances, that what we're really talking about is that manufacturers providing some sort of discount to, say, someone like Walmart, they wouldn't, Walmart, who may not need it, that they wouldn't do to someone like a small mom and pop kind of store that might be in the same region. Influences on children, we see this a lot, and there's actually an extra mile challenge exercise talking about this and targeted advertising to children. But this is one of the the big knocks on the things like tobacco industry, right? We talk back in the 50s and 60s. I was just watching, don't remember what Disney movie it was, but in the 50s, and everyone has a cigarette in their mouth in this Disney movie. We may not think of Disney movie as advertising, but it definitely is part of pop culture. But you don't see that really anymore. There's a lot of negative feedback to that. Some of it's been put on by the government, saying you can't do these kind of things, or say if you do, like motion, like movies we may see, that there's a consequence to it. A movie can jump from PG to PG-13 to R just based off of that there's too much drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be in there. So just kind of how that stuff is marketed, and there's just certain products that can't be marketed to children. Once again, tobacco industry, they actually that was one of the knocks on Joe Camel. I don't know if you all remember Joe Camel. If you don't, go Google Joe Camel right now. But we're talking about a cartoon that was used to promote the cigarette industry. And so they kind of came in and said, no, you cannot use a cartoon in your advertising on TV. That's just not going to work. So that's, targeting children. Unfair comparison ads, you see that it's not illegal to directly compare to a product, but it's illegal to unfairly compare to that product. So as long as you're comparing apples of your products to apples of their product, you can do it. But you can't, say this is great for whatever reason and making up something that's negative about the competitor product. And also just unfair to the customers in general. Once again, trying not to take advantage of the people that are buying the products out there. Okay, so FTC, I already mentioned them, Federal Trade Commission. There's kind of the one that mainly do it. I also want to talk about the FCC because they actually play a big role in this as well. If anyone remembers, once again, Super Bowl, what was it, about 10 years ago now, the Janet Jackson / Justin Timberlake wardrobe malfunction. The FCC is the one that kind of manages things like that now. That comes in and finds television agencies or radio, the communication aspects for putting something that's regulated out on the airways for the consumers to see. There are other, the FDA, things like the, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and SEC, and even the Postal Service there has some sort of impact on what that is, because advertising goes through direct mail as well. So definitely an impact there. Below, you don't need to know all these laws, but they've all been put into place, since 1914 there for different reasons. Things like packaging and labeling. Even recently, you think about things like nutrition, right? So, those things like calories didn't need to be on packaging way back when. And there was actually a revision to this in the last few years that's not even in the book, and just how, they could put it, they would have that information on there, but they would hide the things they didn't want to see. If it was really high in calories, they'd make that really kind of small print. Well, they've standardized that now to try and make, the idea of what you see, the nutritional information for the foods you buy that are uniform, so you know what to expect as you go through that. So lots of laws that have come in over time to help regulate that. And they're all in the book. Here's just a few of them, and there's actually a lot more than this that deal with those unfair practices. So FTC, they come up with remedies, and actually in the next slide we're just going to kind of talk over to how they kind of go about this process. I'm actually just going to jump straight to it, because they go out there and they come up with some sort of ruling, and they can have different things that they'll make you do, things as simple as cease and desist order. So you're running a commercial, they deem it inappropriate or whatever it may be, you can't do that anymore. Things like they can even make you do corrective advertising, which is kind of interesting. You'll actually see this every now and then, and you actually see it a lot. I mean, think of in newspapers and magazines where they may print something that's things like TV, and it's much harder to cease, and it happens once, it's out there, so cease and desist doesn't really hurt them. But things like magazines and advertising where it's out there and it's for people to read and it could be out in the public for a while, they make you do a corrective ad that would say, okay, the things we said in this last one wasn't quite truthful. You'll see that every now and then because they've been ordered to by the FTC or the FCC, and so it's kind of interesting. They have a lot of different avenues they can do to try and make you come back and look at the advertising, or fixed some of the negative advertising you may have done. This idea of self-regulation is kind of interesting too. There's a lot of companies out there that, or a lot of, let me say this, it's usually when we talk self-regulating, we're usually talking about industries and not necessarily companies, where a group of companies kind of got together and say, okay, we're going to operate by some sort of standard. And it's usually run through, like a National Advertising Review Board we approve it and look at it to say, is this a fair standard? But they want to be able to manage themselves. When you get government agencies coming in and regulating you, it always ends up farther than you want. So things start happening. You say, hey, let us fix this ourselves. This is what, tobacco industry tried this. And they tried this in like the 60s, saying that, we're going to do these kind of things and, we're not going to tell this kind of information. But, you still want to make money. So it's kind of this hard thing for people or companies and industries to do effectively. There have been some good cases out there of people that have done it. But more often than not, if it's a kind of a social product, it ends up kind of not working out the way everyone would like it. But this idea of what happens when a complaint comes in. So first off, we're talking about the National Advertising Division. They're the ones that, like, say you make a complaint about an advertiser. Usually most people do it to one of a couple places. You can actually go straight to the FTC or the FCC website and make complaints. And that does happen occasionally. Like, hopefully no one works for Comcast here, but like one of the only complaints I've ever personally made is Comcast, just with some of the way they've done businesses. But that's actually where I ended up at the FCC website to make a complaint, because that's FCC Communications. They manage cable and how cable's put out there, and what the message was being sent to me and what I was actually being charged for two completely different things. Another place to go to is Better Business Bureau. Those are kind of a coalition of kind of quasi-government. Actually, they're private, but they feed into this, like the National Advertising Division, and they feed into some of the FTC and FCC divisions. But this idea, this complaint is made, and it's sent to someone for some sort of evaluation, and usually at that NAD level. From there, it can spread out into the National Advertising Review Board, the NARB. You always hear it called NARB, and there's people that actually review these kind of things and issue some sort of agreement, some sort of request, or some sort of correction to happen. Usually happens right there. Very rarely does things actually end up going into some harder governmental action, because this is where complaints might feed into the start of this, but by the time you get to the end, you start talking about things like laws, and this is where a lot of the laws have come in. from some sort of, lots of complaints that have come through, been filtered, and refers out to this government. When we're saying government in this case, we're really talking about, talking to our senators and congressmen and people that are looking at these practices and making the laws that are trying to change what's happening in front of us. So regulations also in e-marketing have been, if anyone's followed the news over the last 3, 4, 5 years, things like privacy concerns that have come out of companies like Facebook, and how they're sharing the information with advertisers. And when we talk about social media marketing, social media advertising, it used to be fantastic. As an advertiser, I want to, this idea of target markets, I want to market just to the people that want my product. Well, I used to be able to, doing marketing on social media, I could put in, frameworks that would let me drill down to literally, a group of 100 people and send them direct messages with my product. But problem is, once you get down to small groups like that, you can really start losing a lot of privacy, and that's what Facebook really got in trouble for. And it actually came out of the last election cycle that people were trying to swing votes, and you could do very, very, very targeted messaging with very, very, very targeted ads to try and get to reinforce or disprove someone's belief in something. So if you had enough money and you had enough willpower, you used to be able to do it really well. You can't drill down that far anymore. You can't get down to 100 people anymore. You might be able to get down to 5,000, 4, 5, 6,000, maybe 10,000. Still a small number, and it's still pretty good use of your funds, but it's not like it used to be. Things like the Do Not Call registry, it was nice there for a few years. I think it really worked, but then again, today I think I've gotten 3 scam phone calls as well. I've even gotten texts. That's kind of the new interesting one. I got a text from, I'm pulling up my phone right here, some random thing from Uber, but it's not actually Uber. It's someone trying to do a scam. So it's interesting that people are starting to use texts or notifications in addition to just this idea of calling and leaving messages or shooting out some sort of generic scam kind of message that goes along with it. But once again, these are reported the FCC, FTC, that you should be able to do something about it, although it's kind of hard sometimes. Okay, last thing here is this idea of like this pay to play. So first off, we all know, I don't know if you guys actually know, that Amazon, #1 review site in the world. I don't know how many times I've been in a supermarket or whatever it is. I want to, is this a good product? I can pull out my phone, go to Amazon, read, 1,000 reviews on it, and have some sort of idea right then and there. Now, it's one of the reasons that small stores are being, dying off too, is because people do buy these things from Amazon right there in the store instead of buying what's right in front of them. That's a whole nother subject. But Amazon and companies pay for those reviews. You can't always, sometimes you should go through reviews, you'll see a little disclaimer, I was given this product for this review. A lot of times that doesn't necessarily exist. And this actually has even gone on even more to the actual advertising part of it. So like as someone that's put together advertising for things like television and magazines, there's this idea of pay to play there too. That if I want to be included in some sort of like buyer's guide product review, like just to, I may be a great product and everyone loves it, but they won't even like put my company or my product in this listing of industry products unless I advertise with them. And you'll probably see that, like if you've probably gone somewhere and saw some like, what's your top 10 lists of, I'm looking for a new water filter for my house right now. So like I was looking at the top 10 lists for water filters. Then I went through it and I was like, wait, the brand that I heard is pretty good is even on this list. And it's probably because that brand didn't advertise with them in some other way, so they're not being rewarded with the idea of being on this list. So that happens out there too. We can't necessarily trust everything we see. So where does that kind of leave us? It kind of leaves us as advertisers trying to figure that out and doing things like evaluating and analyzing what we see in front of us, and is that going to be ethical or not to the larger scale. So that's just a little bit about ethics in advertising. Hopefully you learned something, and look forward to talking about chapter 7. Thank you. Bye.